So much for the week off I said I'd take after Mario Galaxy was done. This whole Nintendo situation has triggered me a lot more than I thought it would. And seemingly based off the reception the last few videos I've gotten, it's triggered many others as well. There are some factors in the video game industry that have been bothering me for quite a while, and Nintendo's most recent Switch 2 Direct kind of surfaced a lot of these feelings. It's a bit unfortunate because I generally tend to find myself to be a pretty positive person. I usually like to speak highly of the stuff that I'm covering. I find joys in some of the worst games in history. I am not a man that likes to hate because hate is kind of exhausting. But unfortunately, after months of being extremely overhyped for the Switch 2 Direct, and even longer than that being hyped up for the inevitable release of the Switch 2, I find myself in a very odd position. A lifelong Nintendo fan that doesn't quite feel like he has anything Nintendo-wise to look forward to at the moment. It's not to say that what was shown in the Direct didn't appeal to me, it's more like, I don't know if I want to go through this dance again. Seeing as how I'm currently working on my Super Mario Galaxy 2 retrospective, and I hope to have that out within a week, in the meantime, I think I can get a few of these videos out with the research that I've done over the years and just my experience as a gamer in general. Here's the thing though. I'm used to editing retrospectives. I don't make videos like whatever I'm doing right now. I don't know that I'm a good enough editor to make the type of content you would normally see these types of discussions have, nor do I want to. I'm not really here to entertain for this discussion. For me, entertainment is a happy thing, and these discussions in a lot of ways are kind of sad. So these videos are mostly just going to have stock gameplay footage while I do a voiceover and discuss the topics. I don't want to call it a podcast, but I guess it might be more similar to that. A TED Talk, maybe? Oh, actually, I got an idea for what we'll call this. Ninted Talks. Anyway, to kind of get back on track here, I know I'm not unique in this, but as somebody that's grown with the video game industry, and specifically Nintendo throughout the years, there have been many dramatic shifts, some evolutions if you want to call them that have become pretty mainstream today. And I'm not talking about the advancement in the technology. I'm talking about DLC, free-to-play games, loot boxes, subscription models, and things of a similar ilk. I think each one of these deserves their own topic, their own deep dive, their own dissection, if you will. I plan on spending the next few days, or maybe a week or so, dissecting these topics in complete depth and giving them a thorough analysis. We're going to talk about digital games, and more specifically, the problem with them. So first and foremost, let's get the positive out of the way. Digital games are so convenient. The fact that we no longer have to get up, go to our console, take out a game, and put another one in there is something that 11-year-old me would have laughed at. Now granted, our game library back then was not nearly as bloated as it is now, so we weren't really changing the games that much in and out of the console, but we were changing it enough. As someone that prides themselves in being an individual to get the most amount of work done with the least amount of effort possible, being able to hit the home button, go to a different game, and turn that one on is an amazing feature that is not nearly praised as much as it should be. But the problem is this convenience has come at a cost. And I wish I could tell you it was just a 3% convenience or processing fee, but it's more than that. It's more than the cost of the actual dollar value in your hand. Because barring sales, for the most part, a digital game and the physical game will cost the same amount. Or at least they usually do at launch. Over the past few years, I've kind of been working on myself in order to figure out how to not unnecessarily waste money, which is obviously what started this whole mess in the first place. One of the biggest things I cut off was digital games. In almost every metric, you are better off buying a game physically than you are digitally, if both options are available. I would argue that even if you are buying a game physically that has a master key and requires to download the game onto your Switch or whatever console you have of your liking, it would still be financially in your benefit to go with the physical option. This is obviously because of resale value. At some point in time, you're probably going to stop playing these games. This might not necessarily apply to collectors because collectors have a different value than the game that they're actually playing. They're purchasing the games more as a decoration than anything else at that point. But for the players that pick up a title, play it for as long as they can, and then eventually stop playing altogether, specifically if you're a Nintendo fan, you're going to make back a lot of that money. The amount of money you make back will vary depending on the type of game, first party, third party, how popular of a franchise it is. But regardless of the amount of money you make back, you can and will most likely make something back. If it has a Mario on it, if it has a Link on it, if it has a Samus on it, Pokemon, all of the big names. And realistically speaking, if you're a Nintendo fan, you have these games with the big names on them. Which means when you're done playing these games, if you so wish, you can sell them. And I know many of you will say something along the lines of, what if I want to revisit this game later on? What if I always want it on my console so that I can transfer it if the next console is backwards compatible? But keep in mind, the next console is not always backwards compatible. And oftentimes, people don't necessarily keep their old consoles around and play them as much as we think they do. But either way, this is a discussion that could be had on a person-by-person and game-by-game basis. The important thing is, rather than doing what the average person does, that being downloading a game, beating it, letting it sit on their home menu for a very long time, deleting it, and then forgetting they even own it, instead they can keep it as a physical copy that remains seated in front of their face at all times until they one day decide to figure out what they want to do with it. And if they wait long enough, it's going to be worth potentially more than what it was when they purchased it. That's how it works with first-party Nintendo games. Which brings me to my next point. Even if you're not looking to trade in these video games that you purchased in order to make it cheaper to purchase the next game, physical video games are in many ways an investment. Again, Mario, Zelda's, Samus, etc. First-party Nintendo titles specifically are an investment. Every generation or so, there will be a big stride in the retro gaming community, and the nostalgia cycle will take effect, and the next 30-year-old with a midlife crisis will decide to buy every game they had when they were a child. The supply and demand curve will kick in, sometimes to an absurd amount. This might not be a talking point that really resonates with people in their teens, maybe even their early 20s, but at some point in your life, you will look back and think to yourself, man, why did I sell those games? And perhaps even more so, why did I sell that console that had all my digital games on it? It can be very cumbersome to recollect all those titles. It can be very cumbersome to figure out how to access that old account. But if you have the physical copies right in front of you, it might not be that hard. It might be worth flipping. It might pay for the next up-and-coming console if you get rid of it all at that time. The point is, there are returns on these games that I don't think people consider as much as they should. And again, even if you just want to collect it, at the very least, it's a library that's right in front of your face at all times. An abstract collage of your gaming history. I just think it's funny to me that there is a generation of people that will go out of their way to buy a ton of sneakers, hold onto them for dear life, never wear them, never use them, in hopes that one day they will be their retirement plan. Or if they're lucky, flip it and make the money right now. But with the video game market, it's all about the convenience of owning it digital. Even though dollar for dollar, again, if it's the right game, you could potentially make a lot more money on your own personal library of games that you actually play. Like I said, financially, it just makes more sense to buy things physically, in almost every metric. Now, there's a scenario where you could argue if you had a physical game, it's more likely to get lost, more likely to get stolen, more likely to be damaged, but I don't see how that doesn't also apply to your digital library that's taking up your console. Something could completely corrupt your console and ruin your chance at playing all your games. You could be hacked. You could get robbed. There are extreme circumstances on both sides of this. Regardless of how you spin it, financially, it's almost always going to make more sense to go physical. And that's strictly speaking on a personal level, on a micro level. There's a lot to talk about as well on the macro level. Now, if these video gaming corporate overlords were nice people, would offer you an incentive to buy digital by, say, removing the manufacturing and retail costs and allowing you to just purchase a digital game at a lower price, sharing the savings with you, then I could maybe make an argument that it would be more in your benefit to go digital. But we all know our video gaming corporate overlords are not that nice. Instead, they end up making more money on these digital purchases and finding ways to charge you and screw you over even more. And they can do that, and will do that, and have done that. because they got rid of one of its greatest competitors, the second-hand market. With all the years that pass, it is going to get exceedingly more difficult to find and purchase a used video game. And I understand that some people don't buy used video games, but this still affects you. Since there is less supply in the used video game market, the price of used video games ends up going up. There's demand and there's not enough supply to fulfill it. So what happens then is people realize that they're either going to have to spend way more than they want on a used copy of a game, or they can just go and outright buy it brand new. More often than not, people will just decide it's worth it to get it brand new. After all, they want to support their favorite gaming company. Why wouldn't they? Well, there's actually a pretty obvious reason as to why they wouldn't, or rather shouldn't. By effectively eliminating, or at least drastically shrinking the size of the used video game market and pushing more people to rely more on buying something brand new, prices for older games do not need to go down. Not after a year, not after 2 years, and not even after half a decade. So now that company that you're supporting that's making more money off of digital titles, more money out of a suffering used market, instead of them going out of their way to share their savings with you, they're doubling down. They're making you pay more. They're making you pay as if this game is brand new and just came out a week ago. And just to add insult to injury, they'll add a little 10% or a 5% coupon here and there to keep people happy. Some gold coins that'll add up to a few percentage points after you spend hundreds of dollars. On occasion, they'll find ways to bring you into it. They'll offer you a decent deal on buying 2 digital copies of a game. It's kind of like a trial of a subscription service. They'll bring you in, realize it's way more convenient, and hope that you just decide to stick around with them. They're gambling on the fact that once you taste the good life of what it feels like to switch between games on your digital library, you'll then decide to go entirely digital. But now we are slowly making our way towards the point where they no longer have to convince people to go digital. Not to the same extent anyway. Most people have already decided digital is the way to go. And so what ends up happening to the people that don't go fully digital? Well, depending on which region you're in and whether it's legal or not, these greedy companies, rather than offering you an incentive to go digital, they effectively threaten to fine you if you go physical. Do you understand how absurd that is? Rather than offering you an incentive with a cheaper price to buy digital, they increase the price for physical. Now I do have to mention here that there is a bit of a discrepancy on what is true and what isn't true, and Nintendo has been kind of silent about it. I still don't know for certain if people in Europe have to pay £10 more in order to buy a game physical. I don't think that's the case in the United States because, based off of what I read online, it seems like that's illegal over here. I don't know. But even if you remove that whole aspect of it, the fact of the matter is, video game prices are going up. And this actually does have a lot more to do with it than most people are discussing. Video game companies want you to pay as much as possible. That's a reality. Of course they do. They're a business. They know that generated hype will make people buy on launch, and they know that the launch will always be when the cost of the game is at its peak. So they'll use various ways to keep that number as high as possible for as long as possible. It could be season passes, planned updates, random little trinkets here and there so that when they sell the game to people 6 months down the line, they can still charge as if you were buying it on day one. And since so many of those day one folks bought their games digital, with a smaller used market available, you are more than likely to end up having to purchase it brand new. Rinse and repeat as many times as you need until you get to the point where they can charge whatever they want for a video game and not have to worry about kickback. And this has come up in the comment section so many times on every single video I've uploaded, even though I've addressed it to one extent or another pretty much in every one of the videos it's come up on. I am aware that games are cheaper now when you account for inflation, but it is important to note that the video game industry is much larger now than it used to be. As much as I appreciate all of your charts and all of your inflation calculators and all of your conversions, instead of showing me how much more affordable it is to purchase a video game now than it used to be when I was a child, why don't you instead show me charts of how much more money these companies are making now than they were when I was a kid? Back then, they had to charge more if they wanted to turn a profit. The number of consoles sold was not as high. The profit margins were not as high. If they're making more money right now, why do they need to increase the prices on these games? How much is Nintendo, a company coming off a record-breaking generation where they made literal billions in revenue, How much are these poor little folks struggling that they need to increase the cost of our games? Believe it or not, you don't need to defend the prices. You don't need to justify the increase in purchase. You don't need to go to somebody and tell them, hey, actually, you shouldn't feel like you're spending too much on X, Y, or Z. Nintendo spends enough on marketing where they could take care of that on their own if they wanted to. But you know what you should maybe consider? Why is it that these people feel they're hard done by the companies they love? Why is it that so many people all of a sudden feel like they're being taken advantage of? Unless you work for the corporation, stop defending it. You're a consumer. Nobody's gonna come give you a pat on the back and give you a free Switch too. If you want to buy the stuff, go ahead and buy it, but you don't need to call people out for not wanting to spend their money. That is arguably even worse than somebody hating on you because you are choosing to support them. That's why I won't go out of my way to call somebody a Nintendo shill, because in many ways, I'm a Nintendo shill, or at least I was up until 2 days ago. So I know what it feels like when somebody tries to make you feel bad for spending the money that you earned on something you want to enjoy. And likewise, I understand what it would feel like to be somebody that does not want to spend their hard-earned money on a corporation that quite blatantly doesn't give a damn about them. There is at minimum 2 sides to every purchase: the buyer and the seller. The seller can charge whatever they like, they have every right to, but the buyer is not forced to buy anything. And furthermore, the buyer doesn't have to shut up either. They can run around the entire village and let them know that the price that they're paying is absurd. How is it that the entire internet came together to despise and hate on scalpers, who in essence are just small business entrepreneurs at worst? But for some reason, when somebody criticizes the giant corporations that are really the fault of all these terrible practices in the first place, then all of a sudden the gaming community's empathy comes out. This, for me, is problematic. And I'm probably going to start sounding like a conspiracy theorist at this point, but I think it's a top-down thing. They found ways to trick us into talking about this stuff and defending the wrong things, whether it's through bots, plants, marketing schemes. I don't know. I don't have that kind of money to know what kind of power you could have with it. But I will take my tinfoil hat off because otherwise I won't be able to look at myself in the mirror tonight. And finally, the last point I wanted to discuss is the fact that these games that Nintendo is going to be selling are not technically physical anymore. On a user basis, it feels the same. The only extra burden is the fact that you have to wait for the game to download after you enter into your Switch 2. But as far as you, the gamer, is concerned, you put the game in the Switch and you click on it and it turns on. They want you to feel like you're purchasing a physical game without actually giving you a physical game. They're selling you a digital game with an extra step. A digital game without the benefit of being an actual digital game. You have a physical game that now completely removes all of the benefit of not having to take up any space on your hard drive. This is a big deal, even though many people think that it isn't. These are not technically physical games. You get a cartridge, but it's not on there. Well, not for all of the games anyway. I'm not sure to what extent, but I know some games are fully on the cartridge, and from my understanding, most of the popular ones won't be. The problem is now most people will think to themselves, well, I'm downloading all these games on my console anyway, it's gonna have to stay on my hard drive. I might as well go digital because why would I effectively put a key into my Switch to unlock it? A key, mind you, that will require an internet connection the first time you play. You basically here have almost all of the downsides of a physical cartridge with none of the positives. Or really almost none of the positives, because you could technically resell this game card later. Although bear in mind that once the Switch eShop eventually does stop getting support, these will be useless. It basically kind of makes it so that as a consumer you will most likely think, I might as well go digital, because these things aren't really physical. And that's the thought they want you to have. They want you to go digital, because then, like I said, the more people go digital, the more money they can make per every sale, and the less likely it is that someone can purchase a game used later. Microsoft was vilified for this in 2013. What this ultimately comes down to is that when you purchase something, generally speaking, you want to own it. At least I do. And I realize the world has changed. Subscription services have become a lot more commonplace through catchy terms like monthly cash flow and arguments about how many miles you actually drive a day. There are tons of people that will swear by the fact that leasing a car is financially the better decision. And, depending on the type of vehicle and the maintenance costs and all that stuff, it could be. But the reality is, it used to be pretty understood that when you pay for something, you own it. That was the way that it worked. That is in effect what a sale is. If you lease something or you rent something, you're only paying to be able to use it for a specific amount of time. When we play the classic games on Nintendo Switch Online, we don't own those games. We are paying for the privilege of playing with them. And we understand that that is what we're doing. But when you're paying $60, $70, $80 for a video game, the expectation is that you would own that game. And the reality is, you don't. Because they don't want you to own that game. They want you to pay for the privilege of experiencing that game under their own rules. And their rules are purely profit-driven. No matter how much they try to wrap this turd sandwich into a bow and sell it to you, at the end of the day, it's still a turd sandwich. It's anti-consumer. The gaming community has evolved to the point where buying something is no longer owning it. And I would never condone doing something illegal, but if buying isn't owning, piracy isn't stealing. But of course, I would never suggest someone should turn to piracy. And I think Nintendo needs to make sure people don't have a reason to turn to piracy. Ideally, that would make them motivated to make their product better so that people can easily enjoy their games without feeling like they need to go towards piracy. But that's dumb. They much rather spend their money on lawyers and ninjas. Because everybody knows the one thing that a pirate is weak against is a lawyer ninja. I leave you with Funky Kong.